Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 25. Depressed, I lay prone on the floor in the middle of the room, wiggling my antennas. This room had a door, windows, and 4 walls, but was otherwise empty. It was as if there were some invisible barrier covering it. No matter how I charged and barged, I could not find a crack to burrow into or a small hole in which to hide. In the middle of the barrier, there was only a table, with a plate of pastries that emanated a faint aroma. A person stood beside the table. He was all smiles as he waited for me to crawl my way up the table and onto that plate. A trap to catch me. I would be a fool if I were to crawl in. I had originally lived in another courtyard, but having gotten tired of eating the kitchen scraps in that house, I crawled all the long journey to this courtyard, wanting to see if there was anything novel to dine on. How was I to know that I would be entrapped inside this room after following the smell over the small hill that was the door threshold? No matter what I did, I could not find my way out. I saw nothing else in the room other than the table, and when I saw that person, I knew that was the end of me. I lay motionless on the ground. That person looked at me, and I, too, looked at him. Whether he was to crush me or trample me to death, I had absolutely nowhere to flee. But even so, don't expect me to get into the trap myself. He looked at me and said, affably, come on up and eat. I won't hurt you. These are for you. I could understand his words, but I would absolutely not believe him. I continued to lie prone. Do it fast if you want to catch or kill me. Don't be so wishy-washy with all these tricks. I saw the feet under his robe move softly as he walked closer to me. I nonchalantly jiggled my antennas. Instead of lifting his foot, he crouched down and placed the plate of giant pastries on the ground close to me. The aroma of grease was indeed very tempting, but I would not be so easily swayed. He said, slowly, it'd be easy if I wanted to hurt you. Why would I bother giving you food? Then again, if I really want to hurt you, then there would be no escape for you today, so you might as well eat your fill. I shook my antenna again and thought, he's right. I could not run either way, so I might as well fleece off a decent meal. I swiftly climbed up the edge of the plate and the enticing mountain of pastries, then dove head first into the soft, fluffy crusts. I ate until I was bloated before I came to a contented stop. I felt like my carapace must be glistening with grease right about now. I found a flat spot on the mountain of pastries, lay on my stomach, and drifted off into a comfortable sleep. When I woke up, he was still at the table. I guarded the mountain of pastries, eating and sleeping, sleeping and eating. A day and a night went by, and he was still standing by. Another morning came around. I was gradually waking up after a comfortable sleep when I heard the door creak, and he went out. I swiftly made my way down the table and tried to find a crack where I could make my escape, but the barrier I could not see remained securely sealed, and I could not find even a hint of a way out. Just as I was searching, he returned. I immediately hid myself in the shadows at the foot of the table. The barrier, however, did not work on him, and he simply walked through it. I heard a thud on the table. He bent over, as if he knew where I was, and said with the same affability as before, I've brought a plate of new snacks. You can have the latest ones. Slowly, I crawled up along the leg of the table to the surface, up the edge of the white and icy cool porcelain dish, and into a gap between the pastries. Next to the porcelain dish was a large plate, filled with clear water. When he swapped it to the 5th plate of new snacks, I lay prone on the table and looked at him. Don't humans all need to sleep? He had hardly moved or slept these days, he was even more sturdy than me. I sprawled over the mountain of pastries, engrossed in nibbling on a gigantic piece of flaky puff pastry. Are the snacks I gave you delicious? He asked. I jiggled my antennas. If you were to search for your own food, would you be able to find stuff as good as this? He added. I nibbled on the puff pastry and thought about it, hesitantly, my antennas still. Would you be willing to let me give you food if I don't shut you in? He asked. In exchange, you won't go anywhere else and will remain living here. I hugged a corner of the puff pastry and thought about it. This was not something I could guarantee. Who could say for sure that I would not get tired of eating all these things? But this man really was an oddball for wanting to raise a cockroach. Rather than let some other cockroaches benefit from these things, I might as well take them for myself. I supposed I could say yes for the time being. And thus, I jiggled my antennas. I never expected him to be really delighted. He immediately broke into a smile. Hugging my puff pastry, I froze for a moment. He looked really good when he smiled. Among the humans, he could be considered one of the more good-looking ones, I guess. And surprisingly enough, that smile was as satisfying as the puff pastries. Sure enough, he did keep his promise. The barrier was gone, and I could come and go freely. I made a den for myself in a crack in the corner of the room. Every day, I would make my way up the table to feast on the snacks and water he had set there. Once I had eaten my fill, I would cross the threshold and make the long journey to the yard to appreciate the scenery and aid digestion. A bed was added to this house, and it was on this bed that he slept at night. He was the only one living in the courtyard, but a man in an apricot-colored long robe often came visiting with a massive cloth bundle in hand. There were also a few in ink-blue robes and dazzling gowns among the frequent visitors. The first time the man in the bedazzling unlined gown came, I was nibbling on sweetened red bean paste atop the mountain of snacks. Always the considerate one, the man who fed me would pry the snacks apart so that I could feast on both the crusts and the fillings. I was very satisfied. Just as I was contentedly nibbling away, the man in the bedazzling robe moved his gigantic face close to me and immediately let loose a sigh. I did not quite manage to grab on tight to the snack I was hugging, and was blown off to the edge of the plate. Bedazzling robe shook his head. Look at his present circumstances. Truly lamentable. Not only had he blown me off, he had even made such a hypocritical show of sighing. I did not like this person. Ink-blue robe also sighed the first time he came. He did not say a word but shook his head and left. All these people came and went, but he always remained in the courtyard. Not once had I ever seen him leave. I found him rather weird. Sometimes, he would sit at the table reading a book. There was a time he set a book on the table, and I crawled onto his book to take a little stroll. He lifted the book along with me, brought me close to look at me at eye level, and smiled. I felt that he was indeed quite the looker when he smiled. I would probably not get tired of the snacks he gave me for quite a while to come. I did not know how long I lived with him in this courtyard. In any case, the grass in this courtyard had all withered and yellowed, and all these hindrances of leaves were strewn on the ground. That day, I went to the yard to digest my food and crawled my way to the side of the pond, but unexpectedly, a sudden gust of wind blew me into the water. I paddled, struggling to make my way to the edge of the pond, when a large, gaping mouth of a fish suddenly broke through the surface and enveloped me whole. Pitch black all around. I wondered who else would get lucky with those snacks on his table. I crouched on an old tree branch and shook my pitch-black feathers. That particular scholar under the tree had still yet to leave. He held a few crumbs of food in his palm, trying to lure me over to peck at his hand. I flapped my wings, craned my neck, and cawed. I'm such a strong and sturdy one, it's not like I'm a sparrow, so why would I eat off human beings' hands? The scholar, however, was still standing. The young monk sweeping the fallen leaves under the tree said, "Benefactor, don't stand any more. This crow has lived in this tree for several years. No one has ever fed it, and it doesn't eat anything from human hands. On the contrary, those few sparrows under the eaves are obedient and familiar with people." The scholar finally retracted his hand. "Is that so?" He sprinkled the crumbs under the tree. Not that I was not giving him face by not eating his food, but his palm probably could not handle my physique. I flapped my wings, flew down to the ground where I crouched next to him, and pecked at the crumbs. and looked up to see him looking at me with a smile. I had been living in this old tree in front of the back door of this small temple for a long time. I used to live on another mountaintop, but there had been a tempest that blew my tree down. My parents and brothers had flown their own respective ways. At first, I had moved to a tree before the door of a household, and I would fly over to the ridge of their roof every morning to caw and remind them of the time. But the mistress of that household insisted I was an inauspicious omen, so she struck off my nest with a bamboo pole and even greeted me with flying stones. I had swapped places, one after another, but was always loathed by all. In the end, I had no choice but to fly to this tree behind this small temple, where I built a nest overnight. The next day, the young monk stepped out to sweep the floor. Looking at me, he shouted, "Master, there's a crow on the tree." The old monk leaned partially out of the back door and looked up at me. "Amitabha. It's a good thing to have a bird settling in here. Let it stay." The monks in the temple were on a bland, vegetarian diet all year round, while I loved my meat. However, there were a lot of easy-to-catch wild game on this mountaintop. Crouching on the tree every day, I knew everything about when the old monk punished the young monk by making him copy scriptures or when the young monk groused about the abbot bullying him. After pecking all the crumbs on the ground, I flew back to the branch. From that day on, he came to see me every day, and each time, he would sprinkle food all over the ground for me. I heard the young monk ask the old monk, "Master, Master, that benefactor comes and goes every day without a trace, and we don't know where he stays either. He can't be a ghost, can he?" "Amitabha," the old monk said. "That benefactor has an extraordinary bearing. He's definitely not a ghost. As a monk, you must remember not to make wild guesses and cast aspersions on others." I heard the young monk ask the old monk again, "Master, Master, that benefactor always comes and visits the crow every day. Why is that?" "Amitabha," the old monk answered. "Everything in the secular world is a web of worldly attachments to begin with. Cause and effect, I'm afraid only he himself knows. I, too, wanted to know why the scholar came to visit me every day. He came every day, be it sunny, overcast, windy, raining or snowing. Later, whenever I saw him coming, I would crouch on a low branch. Sometimes, he would help the young monk sweep the fallen leaves, sometimes, he would teach the young monk how to write, and sometimes, he would hold a book to read. But most times, he would stand or sit under the tree and talk to me frequently. He spoke of how good the mountain view was, how lively the marketplace at the foot of the mountain was, and what had happened in the marketplace today and would occur tomorrow. Everything he spoke of was about humans, but I could understand all of it, so I listened. Gradually, the young monk came to be on familiar terms with him. He even made the special effort of preparing a stool for him, which he would take out for him to sit on as soon as he came. The old monk would often play with round black and white stones with him under the tree too. And I would crouch on the branch, sometimes cawing a sound or two. That day, the weather was abnormally stifling, and he only left in the evening. At night, the wind started howling, thunder started crashing, and the rain started pouring down in torrents. I was just about to seek shelter under the eaves of the small temple when a bolt of lightning from heaven struck down right on my head. At the very instant the thunderous crash rang out, I wondered if he would still come from tomorrow onward, now that this tree was no more. I half floated in the water, my head peeking out. A man in a particularly bedazzling robe at the edge of the pond watched me and sighed. How truly lamentable! How was he born a cooter? I did not like to hear that. I was clearly a tortoise, why did he call me a cooter? I knew what a cooter was. They called certain freshwater turtles cooters. Turtle shells are relatively flat and thin without any patterns, while tortoise shells are round and smooth, with well-defined sections and distinct patterns. I floated back up to the water's surface again and revealed my shell to show him. Bedazzling Robe continued sighing, "This creature has a long life. Just how many donkey years are you going to have to keep watch over him for this lifetime? Speaking of which, another person by the pond said, I was just about to ask you. I asked you to do me some favor and pull some strings so that he could reincarnate into something more decent. Why is he still like this? Bedazzling Robe immediately answered, Qing Jun, as you know, each time he reincarnates, it's by stuffing him through any opening we can find. There is no place for him at all in the book of reincarnation. He can only fill in for whatever vacancy is available each round. Sigh. How lamentable. The other person said nothing. I looked up at his long robe, fluttering in the wind, and nodded to him. So, his name was Qing Jun. He was the one who had saved my life, and for that, I was grateful. I originally used to live comfortably in a large lake, but rainfall was high this year, and the lake had overflowed its banks. I was swept away into a river, then swept along the river into a small pond. Someone eventually came along to cast a net, and hauled me up along with a bunch of fishes, shrimps, and crabs. We had been carried to the marketplace to be sold. I crouched in a waterless wooden basin and crawled around a few times. Eventually, I just lay down flat, resigned to my fate. They said that those like us who were caught would be put into boiling hot water and slowly scalded to death. I had wondered if that was true. I crouched in the basin, watching as people came and went. Those fishes, shrimps, and crabs were all carried away by person after person. I shrank my head and waited, until the corner of some blue-colored attire stood before the wooden basin. I heard him say, I'll take this tortoise. I let him carry me home. He did not put me into boiling hot water, but into this pond, and let me live in it. He came to the pond every day to scatter some food scraps and talk to me. Sometimes, I would crawl out of the pond and bask in the sun by the rock at the edge of the pond, listening to him as he spoke of how it was a good day today, of how boisterous the marketplace outside was, and of how he wanted to plant lotuses in the pond next year. I had been quite happy living in my old lake, but this place was not too bad either. The weather got colder and colder day after day, and I got lazier and lazier. I dug a hole in the silt at the bottom of the pond. After I was done taking a long sleep, it would be springtime again, when the flowers bloom. He said the peach blossoms in spring were the best, and I loved to look at them, but I did not know what peach blossoms were. Perhaps I would get my chance to see them. After I emerged from my hibernation, I burrowed into the hole and started to sleep. Somehow, I kept having the indistinct feeling that he was still talking by the pond, and it woke me up. I was seized with the sudden urge to crawl over and see him. The pond water was icy cold, and the top was sealed with ice. I struck it with my head for a long time before I broke through, and crawled out with great effort. It was night, and the sky was dark. There was piece after piece of something icy landing on me, snow, I guess. In a moment of inattention as I crawled over a rock, I slipped and, very unluckily, fell on my back. No matter how I tried to turn over, I failed to do so. The snow kept falling on my forelimbs and head. I struggled and struggled until I could move no more. I lay rigidly on my back and looked at the bright shiny place ahead. He must be there. I had never seen peach blossoms, but peach blossoms were surely warmer than snowflakes. In my semi-conscious days, I thought, it was actually a fortunate thing that I had been swept out of the lake. A bedazzling robe stood in front of me and sighed. This is truly lamentable. It's getting more and more outrageous each time. I propped up my eyelids and looked at him. These city folks are so ignorant. Of all the wild boars on the mountain, I'm the most dashing. All the female wild boars melt into a puddle when they see me. Another man stood behind bedazzling robe and looked at me in silence. I used to have a merry life living on the mountaintop, but in a moment of inattention while dashing in the forest this morning, I had fallen into a trap. These two men immediately descended from the sky and released me. Feeling rather displeased, I snorted, but I could not move my body and could only let these two men size me up and down. I felt even more displeased. The other man said, "Let it go first. We'll talk about it again when we get back." Bedazzling Robe said, "Ahem. Or, let me take it back to raise. These atrocious reincarnations can't be helped. In my residence, he could probably become an immortal after several thousand years." I was shocked. How could I be raised like some domesticated pig? What a great humiliation! The moment my body could move, I took to my hooves and ran. I ran and ran and ran, running until I saw red. Without realizing it, I had run to the edge of a steep cliff, and in a moment of oversight, I failed to brake in time. My hooves trod on empty air, and then with a whoosh, I plunged. End chapter. Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 26. I stood in the streets of the capital, taking in the peonies blooming in the flower market. Allegedly, crimson peonies were the rarest and most valuable of all. Of all the 20+ years I had lived, I had seen bright red ones, white ones, and green ones, but never had I ever seen crimson ones. The day before yesterday, Mudan Su had sent someone to deliver me an invitation, saying that he had a pot of crimson peony. This was originally a rare treasure in Hungfa Temple's collection, and the abbot had passed it on to him as a gift after he passed away. It bloomed today, so he was hosting a flower appreciation meet before his house of unsurpassed beauty and wanted me to attend. Initially, this young master had no affection for these flowers and plants. Who cares if it is red or green? It's just a flower, isn't it? However, I had been frequenting Qianong Pavilion as of late, and Yingyu said she loved peonies, so I might as well make a trip to this flower appreciation meet and buy a pot of peonies to elicit a smile from her. The flower appreciation meet started early morning, at the hour of Chen. I arrived a little early, so I wandered off for a leisurely walk. By the time I returned, it was nearly at the established hour. The tune of the flute and the melody of a qin had already been performed as an opening beside the flower terrace. A string of firecrackers had been hung beside the flower terrace, and Mudan Su lit it personally. After the popping noises stopped, he delivered a speech. Then he lifted the veil and revealed that potted peony of his. The flower was a shade of deep red, and it exuded magnificence in its delicate tenderness. It was indeed a marvelous specimen. My heart soared at the sight, as I heard someone in the crowd say it aloud, "A marvelous specimen." What a strange coincidence! Countless people were shouting adulatory praises, and yet out of all of them, I heard this one. What was more, this voice struck me as inexplicably familiar, as if I had heard it many times before. I looked into the crowd and saw a man all dressed in azure standing among the people. He turned aside and looked over, and I froze for a moment. It was like the entire marketplace of people and peonies had all faded into nothingness. For a fleeting instant, I felt as if I had met him before. I walked into the crowd of people and cupped my hands at him. "This humble one is Qin Yingmu. May I ask for your esteemed name?" He flashed a candid smile. "My humble surname is Zhao, and my given name is Hung." After exchanging a couple of pleasantries, he looked like he was going to leave. I hurried up to him and said, "This humble one feels a sense of closeness like that of old friends with you at first meeting, and so I'd like to invite you to the restaurant for a drink. I wonder if you would give me the pleasure of your company." He did not turn down the offer, and readily said, "Sure." It was still the hour of Chen, and the restaurant waiter said that it was still too early for them to start selling wine. This young master set a silver ingot on the table, and he immediately changed tune to "We have ready-made fine wine and dishes." The waiter was all bows as he solicitously led this young master and Zhao Hung into the most exquisite private room, where a few plates of fine cold dishes and a jar of high-grade Shaoxing wine were promptly served. I raised my cup to the person opposite me. "Here. My courtesy name is Heng Wen," he said. "You can just call me Heng Wen. It feels a tad too constrictive to speak so politely." Heng Wen, Heng Wen. Reciting this name felt somehow familiar. In that case, I said, I shall not stand on ceremony with you. My courtesy name is Nanshan. You can just call me Nanshan too. He smiled. Before we knew it, this bout of wine drinking extended well into the evening. I drank like I had not drunk wine in hundreds of lifetimes. I just wanted to keep drinking. We drank in the restaurant until afternoon, and he said he was staying in an inn on another street. Staggering, I followed him to his inn and entered his room, then shouted again for more wine and dishes to go with it. I remembered I recited the entire genealogical tree of my Qin clan to him. I told him how my father once had my fortune told when I was a child, and the fortune teller said that I would be lucky in love this life. I was fated to be a ladies' man. Holding up his wine cup, he looked at me and asked, "Oh, so was it accurate?" I didn't believe it at first either, I said immediately, but it was right on the money. Not that I'm bragging, but I can tell you that countless courtesans in the pleasure quarters of the capital are crying and waiting for me to redeem their freedom. He said, with the shadow of a smile playing on his lips, they couldn't have already gotten together with some poor scholar or rouge seller, could they? I hope they are not merely using you as a raft to get across the river. I frowned. How could I be that kind of sucker, not only a scapegoat but also a cuckold? He let out an inscrutable laugh and said nothing. I did not know how long we had been drinking, but at any rate, by the time we finished a whole jar, the candle on the table had already burned out. I drank until I was in a daze. And he, too, drank until he was unsteady on his feet, so we simply lay down on the bed and slept. I rolled over in bed and said to him, "All these years. And it is only today that I get to drink to my heart's content." He uttered a sound of acknowledgement and went back to sleep. The next day when I woke up, the guest room was empty. He was nowhere to be found. The innkeeper downstairs said that he had not seen that young master go out at all, and the room had not even been paid for yet. He had disappeared, just like that, and I never managed to find him again over the next couple of days. I searched everywhere I could and paid for that same room in the inn by the day, reserving it for him. The innkeeper told me the young master had not said where he had come from, and no one anywhere else recognized him. For some inexplicable reason, I just could not stop looking for him. It was clearly a chance meeting, yet I could not forget him. I searched from the Dragon Boat Festival on the 5th day of the 5th month this year to the Mid-Autumn Festival on the 15th day of the 8th month the following year. For more than a year, no matter who I drank with, it all tasted bland to me. I dreamed befuddling dreams when I slept, where I was a wild boar today and a tortoise tomorrow. One day, I dreamed I was in some place enveloped in mist, and he was standing just in front. I called out his name, and he turned around, looking as if he was about to speak, but then I woke up. This one day, I strolled despondently into a small temple and drew lots to seek divine guidance in my search for him. The person who interpreted the lot I drew was a bad one, and seeing the person I wanted to see again was as difficult as a monkey trying to pluck the moon off the sky. The lot interpreter looked at this young master's crestfallen face and comforted me, saying there was actually still a glimmer of hope in this lot, for the monkey plucking the moon was better than the monkey fishing for the moon. How so? I asked. The lot interpreter explained, when the monkey fishes for the moon, it's fishing for the moon in the water. No matter how it fishes for it, it is but a mere reflection. When the monkey plucks the moon, however, the moon it gets would be the real thing. And I said, but the monkey can't fly. Disconsolate, I fished out a silver, placed it on the lot interpreter's table, and walked out of the temple. The street bustled with a crowd of people coming and going. I strolled to the side of the street, where I heard someone greet me, "Sir, would you like to take a seat?" So I sat and heard him ask, "What would you like to order?" "Whatever's on the menu," I said offhandedly. It did not take long before a large, steaming bowl landed on the table beside me with a thud. The person carrying the bowl said with a solicitous smile, "You seem to be hungry out of your wits, so I took it upon myself to make you a large bowl of wonton noodles." Wonton noodles? I perked myself up a little to look at it. I had never eaten this sort of food before. I took a pair of chopsticks to pick up some noodles and deliver them into my mouth. Such a unique taste. An old man slurping noodles beside me looked at me and opened his mouth, revealing half a mouthful of his food. I gulped down my noodles and asked, "Is something the matter, elder?" The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, "Earlier, I saw a big piece of rat dung stuck in the noodles you picked up, but before I could warn you, you had already swallowed it. At night, when I returned to my courtyard, that piece of rat dung stirred up a raging storm in my stomach, coursing through my limbs and bones." This scenario seemed all too familiar to me. Just like how he had seemed familiar to me, how the word Hengwen seemed familiar to me. And so, stepping on auspicious clouds underfoot, and with my essence, energy, and spirit merged as one, I ascended once more. I stood before the heavenly envoy receiving newly ascended, unranked immortals outside the southern heavenly gate. The heavenly envoy did not think much of a newly ascended immortal like me, who became one through no work on my own, so he gave me the cold shoulder as he spread the register of names open, dipped his brush in ink, and asked me, "What is your name in the mortal world?" "My name is Qin Ying Mu in this life," I said. The heavenly envoy lifted his brush to record it down. "Hold on for a moment. I will have to head over to Ling Xiao Palace to report to the Jade Emperor before you step through the southern heavenly gate." He closed the book and continued, "You really have excellent luck. Taishang Lao Jun's elixirs were ready to be extracted from the furnace today, and the venerable elder Makayapa from the Western Paradise just so happened to call on his residence for a visit. Lao Jun was discussing the Buddhist doctrines in terms of the Dao with him, and in a moment of inattention while keeping away the elixirs, he dropped one into the mortal world. Who would have thought you'd be the one to pick it up? Having excellent luck is not something I can't help either, I said. In fact, this is not the first time. The heavenly envoy lifted his foot and turned around. Wait a minute, I called out. May I trouble you to pass a message to the Jade Emperor on my behalf? Just say that Song Yao has picked up yet another immortal elixir and has, once again, ascended to the heavenly court. The young heavenly envoy suddenly whipped around, his mouth half agape in astonishment, completely dumbfounded. I stood at the base of the jade steps in Ling Xiao Palace. The Jade Emperor sat upright on his throne while the Queen Mother sat beside him. An aberration, the Jade Emperor exclaimed. Truly an aberration. Why say it like that, the Queen Mother said. It hasn't been easy for Song Yao. He was nearly obliterated, yet he actually severed the immortal bond and has now returned to the heavenly court. If immortals have destinies too, then this is probably it. Since it's heaven's will, why put him in a spot? The Jade Emperor scrutinized my face and sighed after a moment. Forget it. Just as the Queen Mother has said, this is probably your fate. You were nearly obliterated, and now you have risen from the ashes to be reincarnated and reborn. We will not continue to pursue everything that is now in the past, but you can only be an immortal with no official post in the heavenly court, and the heavenly court will also treat you as non-existent. There is an island in the sea in the far east. Make your way there yourself to live out your days. I bowed. Thank you, Jade Emperor. Then I exited Ling Xiao Palace. The young heavenly envoy who had led me into the hall was still outside the door, so I asked him, can I just ask where Heng Wenqing Jun is now? The young heavenly envoy raised his head woodenly. What Heng Wenqing Jun? Heng Wenqing Jun of Wei Yuan Palace, who is in charge of acclaimed literary figures, I said. The one in charge of acclaimed literary figures is the Tianjun, Lu Jing, the young heavenly envoy said. He lives in Wei Yuan Palace. There's no Heng Wenqing Jun in the heavenly court. Icy snow crushed down on me. A voice beside me called out, Song Yao, Song Yao. I saw Bi Hualing Jun the moment I turned my head. I instantly pounced over and grabbed his shoulders. Where is Heng Wen? Bi Hualing Jun looked at me with eyebrows raised. You've got some nerve for asking that. The problem with Hualing Jun was that the more you were in a hurry, the slower he would be, and the more anxious you got, the more back he was. He slowly led me to a secluded spot and slowly picked a rock to sit on. Only then did he slowly say, "That day, you put on such a touching display of crawling to the mortal world. To be obliterated, but the truth is that Heng Wen knew of it as soon as you left the southern heavenly gate. When he rushed to the mortal world, you were already beyond saving, so he went ballistic and foolishly took out his own immortal essence to save you. He had never been immortal before, and without his immortal essence, he would have been instantly obliterated. Fortunately, the mortal world could not withstand his powers, and just as he was about to extract his essence, that mountaintop collapsed. Donghua and I hurried down and distributed a little of our respective immortal essence to you. Then we asked Lao Jun for an elixir pill and went to the western paradise to beseech Tathagata for some relics. It was with difficulty that we managed to preserve a small wisp of your soul. I asked Yan Wang for a favor and stuffed you into the cycle of reincarnation, so that you may nurture and regenerate your soul whole through several lifetimes. Heng Wen descended to the mortal world in secret to see you reincarnate. The Jade Emperor had him taken back to the heavenly court and put Lu Jing in charge of acclaimed literary figures. From then on, Heng Wen Qing Jun ceased to exist in the heavenly court. Where is Heng Wen now? I asked. The scenery in the heavenly court was still the same, as if my several lifetimes of reincarnation in the mortal world had been but a mere dream. Prepared to head to the island in the sea to the far east, I stood from afar and gazed at my own Song Yao Yuan Jun residence in Heng Wen's Wei Yuan Palace of times bygone. Just as I was turning to leave, a party of immortals walked over from the floating clouds. I retreated to stand by the side of the road. Surrounded by the rest of the Baidu Kixing, an indifferent figure dressed in a plain robe stopped when the party neared. Having freed himself of the past, Tianchu was no longer as cutting cold. He looked at me, and asked in a soft-spoken voice, "Might you be the new immortal in the heavenly court?" "Yes," I answered. "This humble one is Qin Ying Mu, who has just ascended to the heavenly court." Tianchu nodded and smiled, then proceeded in the other direction. I looked at his receding figure. The past of years bygone was much like the scent of the Lady Bank's roses in the first rays of yesteryear's morning sun, having faded away into the breeze and mist, leaving not a trace in its wake. With great haste, I hurried over to the far east. The island in the sea was strewn all over with the skewed shapes of divine trees and boulders in disarray. I weaved my way back and forth among them. "Where is Heng Wen?" I had asked. And Hualing Jun had said, "The Jade Emperor has exiled him to the island of the far east." He stood under the heavenly tree outside the doors, and smiled softly at me, like the brilliant bloom of 3,000 peach blossoms sweeping through the spring breeze. "I owe you for all of 5 lifetimes and for restoring my soul," I said. "Coupled with the interest, I might never be able to repay it, ever. You repaid my debt to Xian Li on my behalf." "You can offset it," Heng Wen said. "I doubt so," I said. "You'll lose out a lot if I do that." Heng Wen waved his worn folding fan. "I'm not really that bothered about it. So what if it's offset? So what if it isn't?" I wrapped my arms around his shoulders. "Precisely. You are mine, and I am yours. Between us, there is no such thing as a debt." The end. Peach Blossom Debt. Extra chapter: The Living Immortal. The Living Immortal was an ordinary charlatan. Charlatans were aplenty among all the fortune-tellers in the world, and the Living Immortal was just one of the extremely common ones of the lot. In the words of the Living Immortal, who once lamented to his fellow charlatans, "No fortune-telling in this world is accurate. If fortunes can really be told and fates changed, I'd have long turned my luck around and become the damned Prime Minister." The Living Immortal had originally lived in a small city with an abundance of fish and rice. It was there in the city's Yu Lao temple that he had set up a stall all year round. When the unmarried young women and married old women came to the temple to pray either for marriage for themselves or their children, they would often head to the stall to have their fortunes told. The city was small, so the whole city knew which household's miss took a shine to which household's young master, as well as whose daughter was of marriageable age. As such, the living immortal was right on the money every time he told a fortune, and that was how city folks came up with his nickname. They would often invite him for a drink whenever someone took a wife or married off their daughters. But then, on a certain day of a certain month in a certain year, another fortune teller came to the city. This fortune teller not only could match birthdays, interpret 8 characters, divine fortunes, and read fortune lots, but was even versed in bone physiognomy and bone weight astrology, invoking deities and spirit writing, capturing demons and subduing evil, as well as restoring peace to a residence and turning its feng shui around. The living immortal did not have as many tricks up his sleeve as the newcomer did, and it did not take long for him to lose the battle. His business dwindled by the day, until it looked like he could not afford to even scrape a meager living. Thus, the living immortal decided to try his luck in the wider world. Not only could he receive more business, he could also train and develop his skills. The living immortal thus hoisted on his shoulder a banner with iron-clad fortune-telling written on one side, carried his luggage on his back, and began his journey to the vast world yonder. On a glorious spring day, he arrived at the capital city. As he expected, the capital was a gold mine. Having made his way to a Daoist temple, the living immortal rented a room in the side wing to set down his luggage. Then he walked into the yard to see the scenery, looking up just in time to see a man holding a child by the hand strolling in the yard. The living immortal glanced over, and saw that the person was fair-faced, slightly bearded, and about 30 or so years old. At first glance, his clothes seemed simple and plain, but on closer inspection, they were of high-quality fabric. The child still toddled a little on his feet, and his tiny attire and shoes were all exquisite. There was even a shiny golden longevity lock around his neck. Simply a fat sheep that has fallen out of the sky, an easy mark for the picking. Unhurriedly, the living immortal walked over, stroked his beard, and smiled. This little young master has such a distinctive, refined appearance. He's truly a blessed person. The rich man holding the child's hand looked up at the living immortal. Oh? How can you tell? You have an extraordinary bearing, and the little young master has a noble air to him, the living immortal replied. Those with a discerning eye can tell at a glance that both of you are distinguished people. If this humble one were to say that I divined it, I'd be deceiving you. He cupped his hands, glanced down at the little one, furrowed his brows in a seemingly unwitting manner, then turned to walk away. With his hands behind his back, the living immortal pretended to look at the horizon as he strolled leisurely and counted inwardly to himself, 1, 2, 3. At the 6th step, he heard the man say from behind him, "Mister, please hold on." The living immortal turned around. "Is there something I can help you with? You seemed a little worried when you looked at my son earlier," the man said. "Might I ask why?" The living immortal walked over slowly as he thought to himself, what shall this old one use to deceive him? A great calamity in life, a seemingly short life expectancy, adverse to extreme sufferings. A calamity in life was often overused, and cursing someone with a short life seemed to be bad karma. The living immortal was a charlatan with a conscience. He walked over to the man and looked down at the child. "May I presume to ask if the little young master was born in the Jiazi year, the first year of the 60-year cycle?" Peeking out from beneath the longevity lock hanging around the child's neck was a corner of an embroidered pouch, which seemed to be embroidered with a pattern of a mouse rolling money. So the living immortal had ventured a bold guess. The man was awestruck. "That's right. My son was born on the first day of the 7th month in the Jiazi year." The living immortal stroked his beard and divined with his fingers. The little young master was born to riches and honor, and his life is destined to be smooth sailing. In the future, he will get to enjoy a rare blessing that no other can enjoy. However, when it comes to marriage, I'm afraid The living immortal mulled it over. He was not really adept at changing the diagram of one's fortune and warding off calamities, but his counterparts in the capital surely knew how, so he might as well pull out his proudest ability and haul in a big, freaking profit. What about his marriage? The man prompted. The living immortal said, earlier, when this humble one looked from afar, I saw little young master radiating with brilliant yang energy. Only those born on a yang day of a yang month in a yang year would have such an aura. Naturally, the man asked, what do you mean by on a yang day of a yang month in a yang year? The living immortal explained, the Jiazi year is made up of the first heavenly stem of Jia and the first earthly branch of Zi. It follows that the first heavenly stem of Jia is yang, while the second heavenly stem of Yi is yin, and so on. The earthly branch of Zi is of the same character as sun or male, and males are inherently yang, while females are inherently yin. What's more, the Jiazi year is the very first year of the heavenly stems and earthly branches 60-year cycle. That makes it yang on top of yang. Months and days are sorted in accordance with the properties of yin and yang, with odd numbers being yang and even numbers being yin, so the first day of the 7th month in the first year of the cycle is doubly yang. To top it up, the marriages of those born in the 7th month at the peak of summer are mounted with obstacles to begin with. As the poem goes, the dog days of summer at its height, is when the wild goose alone flies. So, a person born on a yang day of a yang month in a yang year. The living immortal sighed and shook his head, is doomed to a fate of eternal solitude. Stunned, the man looked at the child he was holding. A fate of eternal solitude. How could that be? Mister, can it be salvaged? The living immortal had been waiting for this question. With a deep frown, he said, alas, such a fate is typically beyond salvation. The living immortal dragged out the word beyond salvation, all but ready to add a however after it. But he was only just mid-drawl when the man staggered back a step. To think it can't be salvaged. With that, he turned his head to gaze at the sky and let loose a heavy-hearted sigh. The living immortal hurriedly strode a step forward. However, before he could finish, he stepped on empty air. As it turned out, the living immortal and the man had been standing by the side of a dry well. A certain royal consort was coming to the temple to perform a Daoist ritual, so the temple repaired the grounds, and the fabric they used to lift the soil had been left behind on the mouth of the well, all but forgotten. With soil covering the fabric, it looked no different from the usual ground, other than a slight bulge, and the moment the living immortal stepped on it, he promptly plummeted down right to the bottom of the well. The back of his head struck against the wall, and before he could even yell in pain, he fainted. Once the man was done with his long sigh, he turned back, but it was empty all around, and the fortune teller from earlier was nowhere to be found. From then on, a new legend that a great master had once appeared here began to make its rounds in the capital. The living immortal broke an arm when he fell to the bottom of the well, and he had to recuperate for more than a month before he got better. His expenses in the capital were high, and his years of savings were almost depleted. The living immortal felt that this was just not his time in the capital. His signs possibly clashed with this place, and his fall was an omen that he would not only fail in his endeavor but end up losing money instead. So, the moment his arm recovered, he immediately departed the city and set off for the world at large to ply his trade. After more than a decade of wandering, the living immortal set foot once again in the capital. The living immortal was already in his 70s at this point, and he was no longer mobile enough to lead a wandering life, so he thought of finding a place where he could run a steady business and afford to be comfortable enough to live out his life in retirement. The living immortal was still fascinated by the capital. He found the bustle of the city lively, and there was plenty of business to be done. As they said, the greater hermit lives in reclusion in the city. The marketplace of the capital was the most thriving of all, which was most suitable for the retired elderly like him. After more than a decade, that Daoist temple was surprisingly still going strong. The temple master, also nearing 70 years of age, was very warm and cordial when he saw the living immortal. The living immortal bought 2 old houses in the alleys of the capital and went to this Daoist temple to set up his stall during the day. After the living immortal settled in, he first made inquiries about uncommon happenings in the capital, as was his usual practice. There were countless uncommon happenings in the city, but of them, one stood out as the most uncommon. The eldest son of the current Prime Minister had a fate of eternal solitude. Legend had it that Prime Minister Song once met a great master who had told the eldest young master's fortune and said that he, being born on a Yang day of a Yang month in a Yang year, was doomed to be single for life. The fortune told by the great master was right on the mark, and the eldest young master from the Prime Minister's household was now the joke of the capital. Young Mrs. betrothed in marriage to him would definitely elope with someone else, and maidens he took a fancy to would surely get together with another. Of late, this young master Song had his eyes set on a lady from the brothel. Except for his own self, the whole city knew that said courtesan had a lover, a scholar living in a run-down temple. The living immortal received the news with a good amount of astonishment. Never had he expected the fate of eternal solitude to really exist in the world. If only the one I had met back then was this one. One certain day, the living immortal was sitting behind his stall in the temple when a dispirited young master walked in. The living immortal noted his weak gait, crestfallen demeanor, dejected expression, and lifeless gaze. To his experienced eyes, it was clear at a glance that this youngster was heartbroken. The living immortal thought that since the phrase fate of eternal solitude had been used by a great master before and was validated by a person of eminence, he ought to use it often, so he called out, "Young master." Said young master pulled himself together a little and turned around. The living immortal stroked his snowy white beard and narrowed his old eyes. "Young master, this old one sees a dark aura over your head, and your Hongluan star, the star of marriage, is dim. Are you, by any chance, in distress because of love?" The young master tottered unsteadily to the front of the stall, sat down, and extended his palm without further ado. "Since you can tell, read my palm. I'm asking about my marriage." "This old one is not versed in the art of palmistry," the living immortal said. "Would you take a reading with a character analysis?" "Oh, well," that young master said, "we'll do that then." He lifted a brush and wrote the character for pair. The living immortal half closed his eyes. "Break up this character, and it comprises the radical again and again, one after another in a recurring cycle, which implies that there's no escaping from it. Young master, you asked about your marriage, so forgive this old man for speaking bluntly, but I fear your fate is one of eternal solitude." The young master's eyes went blank as he sat in a daze. The living immortal was just about to say, however, when the young master suddenly barked out 2 bleak laughs and mumbled to himself, "As expected. Just as expected. No matter when I have my fortune read, it's always this lousy fate." He let out another 2 more laughs and staggered right out the door. The living immortal shouted after him, young master, you have not paid me yet." He chased him to the door, but the young master was long gone. A crippled beggar outside said with a laugh, "So I see you've also met young Master Song today." He's rather pitiful. Because a great master has verified his fortune before, all the fortune tellers in the city will now come up with fate of eternal solitude whenever they read his fortune in marriage. He's really unlucky. Only then did it dawn on the living immortal that the youngster earlier was the famous young Master Song. Oh well, never mind the money. That lad was indeed quite the pitiful sight. The second year, the living immortal heard that young Master Song had, for no apparent reason, vanished from home without a trace. This matter stirred up a huge commotion. Even the emperor issued an edict to search all over the world for him, but to no avail. Everyone guessed that young Master Song, being too heartbroken, had seen through the secular world and had gone to a small temple in an old, virgin forest deep in the mountains to become a monk. On the contrary, the living immortal's business in the capital was smooth sailing. So many people in the world love to have their fortunes told, the living immortal said to his apprentices, "We're not tricking them into spending this sum of money, rather, they are the ones willing to spend. The living immortal's apprentices were all vagrant youths who wandered the streets. Seeing that they did not have enough to eat, he would often share his food with them before eventually coming to accept them as apprentices. The living immortal said, "Just think of it as accumulating merit for the afterlife." The living immortal lived to be more than 90 years old before he passed away peacefully in his sleep. Sure enough, in accepting those few apprentices of his, he did indeed accumulate merit. 2 of the apprentices he had taken in were the only sons of prominent clans who had managed to escape when their family properties were confiscated and their entire clans sentenced to death. 3 were the children of starving commoners who had fled to the capital after the Yellow River flooded its banks. Grateful to the living immortal, the parents of these apprentices in the underworld had put in a lot of good words for him before Yan Wang. Yan Wang summoned the living immortal to his palace hall, and said he could arrange for him to be born into riches and honor in the next lifetime. As he still had some merits left, Yan Wang also asked if he still had any other wishes. The living immortal said, "Yes, this old man has been called the living immortal for a lifetime, and yet I'm not blessed enough to ascend to immortality and see the heavenly court. So, I'd like a trip to the heavenly court." And Yan Wang said, "That's easy." He arranged for Judge Liu to deliver an official correspondence to the Jade Emperor, with the request for a heavenly envoy to bring the living immortal to the heavenly court for a tour. As the living immortal strolled around in the heavenly court, he still did not forget to ask about uncommon happenings in the area. The heavenly envoy guiding him answered, "If you look at it from a mortal's point of view, there are uncommon happenings everywhere in the heavenly court. If we were to talk about the most uncommon of all," the heavenly envoy pointed with a finger, "Immortal Song Yao over there happened to pick up an immortal elixir and ascended, he's pretty much a rarity." The living immortal squinted his eyes and craned his neck to look in the finger's direction. Only to see a young immortal in a long blue robe and an immortal in a long light-colored gown sitting together under a heavenly tree. The immortal in blue sighed to the immortal in light colors, "Heng Wen, I'm telling you, when I was in the mortal world, a great master once told my fortune and said that my fate was one of eternal solitude." End chapter.